Kiritsuke versus the K-tip Gyuto, what is the difference? Before I dive in, you need to understand that in today's modern knife world, there is a lot of wiggle room in how these knives are named. At Cutlery and more, we always, well, 99+% of the time, we honor the name that the maker or the brand gives the knife. There are some little things here and there that we switch up just because they make zero sense, but that's a whole other video. What I want you to understand is that there are Kiritsukes that are being called a K-tip Gyuto. There are K-tip Gyutos that are being called a Kiritsuke. There are actual K-tip Gyutos that are only being called a Gyuto. It can get a little bit confusing. In fact, there are some knives that are called a Kiritsuke and a K-tip Gyuto, depending on the site that you go in. Let's get started looking at the traditional characteristics of a Kiritsuke, because we wouldn't have the K-tip conversation if it weren't for this knife. Now, traditionally a Kiritsuke, and by the way, I say Kiritsuke, 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 I don't care what you say, as long as you understand the knife itself. Traditionally, a Kiritsuke is a single bevel knife. So one side of the blade is dead straight and the other is ground to have the sharpened edge. And depending if you're right or left-handed would be the side that is straight. So I am right-handed, so a right-handed single bevel knife for me, the left side would be straight and then you would have the sharpened edge on the right. Today, a lot of Kiritsukes, I would say most Kiritsukes are made with a double bevel. They're still called a Kiritsuke, and there are plenty of other Japanese knives that have a similar story. The ones I have here are all double bevel. This is the Enso Ginsan. We have the Enso SG2, the Shun dual core, and the Yaxle Rai. A couple things that all of these share. The first is they all have a very straight spine. When I'm looking straight down here from the handle, dead straight. Then they all have either a very hard angle, reverse tanto-like cut at the tip of the blade. The Shun here is the only one that's pretty rounded, but still it is mostly the same type of angle. That angle can definitely change, so don't get hung up on how many degrees or anything like that. You're just gonna have this type of shape. Now, all these have a slight curvature at the tip of the knife, and the tip itself is going to be meeting closer to the sharpened edge side of the blade, not the center or at the spine side. The other thing that you will notice is that the Kiritsuke is going to be in that 8 to 10 inch mark. You get shorter, you're basically looking at a bunka. When you get longer, you're looking at different slicing knives. So this right here, regardless of the handle, traditional octagonal, octagonal, octagonal with a bolster, and then more rounded with a bolster and an end cap. Don't worry about this handle, don't worry about the steel. It's more so about blade shape. Now, I'm gonna keep the Enso Ginsan on the easel here. Now pop up a couple different Gyutos. That is the Yoshikane Shirogami white carbon steel. This is the Saji STRIX. And then this is the Takayuki Aogami #2 blue. Let's get a little bit more room here because I love to be able to fit the Matsubara tall and long Gyuto. Now, what do we have? The first thing you will notice is that pretty much, all of these, the spine begins to taper pretty much immediately with the Yoshikane, with the Saji. It's a little slower for this one, and this one has a taper as well. You're gonna have a more rounded tip of the spine, and the tip of the Gyuto, you can see 1, 2, 3 are a little bit closer to the center of the blade, whereas the Takayuki here is closer to the edge of the blade. and they will all have a curvature. Again, depending on where that tip is going to determine the curve, it's going to determine the performance, etc. Now, if you compare this sharpened edge profile to the other knives, you can see that 1, 2, 3 have more of a pronounced curve, whereas the Takayuki is going to be similar to the Kiritsuke in the sense of the curvature. What's important to understand, just looking at this, is that these knives right here are going to perform very similarly on the cutting board because of the shape of the sharpened edge where the rubber meets the road, compared to 1, 2, 3 are going to perform differently, but perform similarly just because of the way the curvature is similarly shaped. Yes, the Matsubara here is quite a bit taller. It's more rounded at the tip. You're going to get more of a flow, and we won't even get into steels, but although this type of blade profile will be better at the European style rock chop, can you do it with these? Yes. Is it recommended to do it a lot or often? No, because these are much higher Rockwell, harder steel Japanese knives that don't like that type of pivoting, cross chop, nothing like that whatsoever. So, similar in the sense of performance on the cutting board, different. Now, is this tip of this Kiritsuke going to perform so much differently than any one of these Gyutos? Maybe in the sense of using the very tip of the knife at different angles and off the cutting board, and with possibly with some slicing depending on the ingredient, or if you're trying to get into a really hard place to trim, maybe. I would say because of the way the curve is and the tip meeting closer to the cutting board, if you need to use the tip for a slicing type of motion or sideways, your angle of your wrist is not going to be as high off to be able to reach that tip to the board compared to quite a bit different. Let's keep that there, oh, right there, versus there. So in that sense, is there going to be a difference in performance? Yes, but again, it depends on how you are using the knife. Now, let's keep a Gyuto up there, and let's bring out a K-tip Gyuto. So now we have 3 knives. These two are going to perform near identically on the cutting board. The tips are going to be roughly the same. You're really not getting anything that's super pronounced about this K-tip versus this regular Gyuto shaped. It's going to be different than this because of the straighter edge profile. So yeah, Kiritsuke, Gyuto, K-tip Gyuto. There's going to be some differences between this and these, but not so much these two together. Now let's take it to another step further here. This is the Nigara SG2 Kiritsuke. However, if you search this exact blade on other websites, they will call it a K-tip Gyuto. It's a Kiritsuke. That's what Nigara calls it. So that's what we call it, but other companies will call this a K-tip Gyuto. Now what's interesting compared to the Enso Ginsan with the very straight spine is the Nigara has this slight outward, upward type of curve right there. And then that kind of follows the curvature of the edge profile here. But here's the thing. If you look at the sharpened edge and you compare this knife and this knife and this knife, because the more pronounced curve of the Nigara Kiritsuke, it's going to perform very similarly to the Gyuto and the K-tip Gyuto, but not the same as the Enso because the tip closer to the edge, straighter edge profile, that's what is going to matter much more so than the name. It's a lot. It's actually very simple to talk about the differences between these, but we like to dive deep and geek out into the things that really matter. And you'll see in these this versus that videos, we talk so much about how the name of the knife is not as important as the shape of the sharpened edge. I'm Chef Brandon with Cutlery and More. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know in the comments what you would call this Nigara SG2. Would you call it a Kiritsuke, or would you call this a K-tip Gyuto? Take care.